So this is where we left off. We imported our footage into Premiere Pro. We took a look at the different workspaces and the different panels. Now it's time to get started with our first lesson, which is how we can deal with imperfections on the skin and just give the skin an overall smooth effect. So before that, let's clear the markers that we made in the previous lesson by right-clicking on the timeline, the timestamps right here, and then hitting the Clear Markers option. Now they're gone and I can create more markers if I need to. I'm going to start with our first clip, which is a close-up shot of this person. There are some imperfections, so we're going to remove those pimples and just give the skin a smoother look. Let's get rid of the extra clips and work with our first clip. Use backspace to delete those clips. And for this one, I don't really need the audio. Therefore, I can just get rid of it by holding down Option or Alt and clicking on the audio track. Hit backspace to delete it. You can also do this when you're bringing in the video. So if you go to Project, double click on your clip, you can just drag the video alone. So we're going to need to choose a different workspace for this lesson. And we're going to be using this workspace quite a lot since we're dealing with colors within a video. So let's head over to our workspace and switch to the color workspace. This is going to give us a Lumetri color panel, which we already know how to use. But if for some reason it's not there, you can just bring it in using the Window tab and enable the panel. Select your clip. Over here, I have it set on source, so we can kind of see the before and after. And we're pretty familiar with the different panels, but for this lesson and the upcoming lessons, we're going to focus on the HSL secondary. This is a really helpful section of the Lumetri color panel because it allows you to work with a certain selection of colors. It can help us isolate colors, change the color of that isolated section, or in our case, deal with the skin tones within the clip. So it's a really helpful area in the Lumetri color section, and we're going to see how it works. So we have the different eyedroppers here, which you can use to select a certain area, certain color, and put it in the selection. You can add to that selection and then remove from that selection. Then we got the different colors and the HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. You can enable or disable these by pressing these checkboxes. Then we have the area down here, which is for you to see what exactly you're selecting and what you're not selecting. So color gray means that your color will be there and anything else that's not selected will be gray. You can do this with black or just go for like a black and white look. Anything that's white is your selection. Anything that's black is not in your selection. We can invert the selection, reset the entire thing, refine the selection, and then do some correction to that area. So let's begin. I'm going to select his skin tone. So grab this eyedropper tool. And when selecting, you want to grab a mid-range of colors. So you're not going for the highlights or the shadows, but a rather average area. So somewhere around here, usually it's on the cheek. But in our example where we have some redness on the cheek, we want to really avoid that because we're trying to get this skin tone and not this dark red. So grab one of the areas, click once, and you can see that our sliders look different. So we're getting these two triangles and these white lines. The top triangle is your selection for the saturation. The bottom one is the feathered amount. So the further away it is, the smaller details you can bring in. The closer it is, the less of those small details you're bringing in. I'm going to hit Command Z and go back to what we had. In order to see what I just selected, I'm going to use this option. Using this, I can see what my selection looks like. So let's go over here and we're going to leave hue as it is. I'm going to bring in more colors later with the eyedropper tools. For saturation, you can just grab the sliders, but first we need to work with the luminance. And once we have the right amount inside our selection, we can work with the saturation later. So grab the edge right here and pull it towards the right, first with the top triangle. And if I want to bring in those finer details, I can just use the second triangle. Something like this. Now I have brought in most of the skin, but we've left out some smaller areas. So I can use the saturation right here, the top triangle first, bring it in until I have a nice selection of the skin, and then use the bottom triangle to bring in those little details around our selection. So far it's looking good, but we have left out some of the red areas of the skin. So let's grab this eyedropper with a plus and select the area on the nose. There it is. We got most of our skin, but we also ended up bringing in some of the hair and the eyebrows and all that. So to fix that, we can just again use the luminance slider, pull it back until we only get the skin. It's okay if you're not getting these tiny bits. Those are already in the shadows, so the imperfections wouldn't be as noticeable compared to the brighter parts of his face. But I'm just going to use the bottom slider to just get rid of the eyebrows and all of that. The most important part is the brightest part of his face because that contains the pimples. So just focus on this big bright area and the rest is not that important. So just use your sliders until you get a decent selection of your skin. Once you have that, we're going to blur the edges. Just grab the blur slider, and the more you pull it towards the right, the more blurry those gray areas will be. But we just want a subtle look, so the skin smoothing effect isn't that noticeable. I think 3.5 is good. Then let's scroll down and remove from the sharpness. And zoom in right here on the skin. Grab 150 and pull down. Focus on the big area. So let's reduce from the sharpness, because if I add to it, I'm going to bring in more of those pores and all the pimples. But if I remove from it, I'm going to kind of flatten out my subject's face. The goal with skin retouching isn't to completely flatten out the skin. We want some of that texture, but we're just trying to reduce those pores and those fine lines. So this is not what we're looking for, but rather something a little bit more subtle. So around -28 will give us a more natural result. Now if I uncheck this box, you can see the difference. It's a little bit of a blur. Let me just zoom in a bit more. So we can see exactly what that looks like on the skin. This is without HSL secondary. This is with it. It's a really subtle change, but it's going to help the skin look a lot better. Once you've zoomed in, you can also grab the saturation and maybe make them look a bit more pale or more or add more of that color to their skin. It depends on your clip really. I will add some saturation because the video is really cold and it could also use some color. So 112 is good for me. You can also use the contrast slider to reduce some of those shadows that are caused by these wrinkles. So just grab it towards the left. Again, we're not looking to make them look really flat, but rather a subtle change in those contrast. Once we're done with those effects, you can go ahead and uncheck the color gray to get rid of that overlay. And now I can just close off HSL secondary. And now I have myself a smoother skin for my subject. But because we used HSL secondary, it's only limited on their face. If I were to use a mask and then track it, I might have ended up getting bits of his eye, his eyebrow, and all that. But as you saw, the HSL secondary helped me get only the skin tones. Now let's go ahead and take this a step further. Let me go back to my source. You can see it before and after right here. Let's duplicate our clip by holding down Option or Alt on Windows and just dragging one right above. This is our duplicate. Let's go to the effect right here and look for the Gaussian blur effect right here. Drag this onto the second clip, the duplicate. Go to the effects controls for your top clip. And what we're going to do is to first reduce the saturation completely. So go to the basic correction on the duplicate, of course, and reduce the saturation. So essentially a black and white video is what we have. Now we're just going to the Gaussian blur section and add a decent amount. Around 20 is suitable for my clip. And what we're going to do is to just change the blending mode to soft light. So this video entirely, just go to opacity, blend mode, and change this to soft light. So this already adds some softness and some contrast to our clip. Of course, we get to change the amount of contrast with the curves down here. Go to RGB curves and you can just lift those areas and change the way this looks. This already is a form of color grading, this technique, but it also gives us a little bit of blur. So you can just use the curves to make it the way you want it. You can also use the basic correction, maybe lift those shadows, reduce those highlights, and just make this the way you want it. So let's zoom in right here and see how the effect has softened out the skin of our subject. I'm going to go in right here and move these to one floor up so I can bring my original clip. Let's nest these by selecting them both, right-clicking, nest, skin retouch. Then below this, I'm going to bring in my original clip. Just drag the video alone. So this is with the skin retouching. This is without it. So it's a really subtle change, and that's exactly what we need. Now onto the pimples that we want to remove. We're going to use the Gaussian blur effect one more time. So just create a new adjustment layer right over here. Hit OK and bring this right above. I'm going to call this, let's name it here. I'm going to call this spot and just match the duration. Let's go back to the beginning of our timeline and zoom in onto one of those points that we'd like to remove. Let's start from the forehead. We got one right here. And on this spot adjustment layer, we want to add the Gaussian blur effect one more time. Put it right above, and using the effect controls, we're going to grab the circular mask. Just drag it right above your pimple. And we're looking to create a perfect circle with enough space around it so that we can feather it later on. So you're looking for something like this. Again, make sure that you're at the beginning of your timeline and make a nice mask around that pimple. We're going to track this forward so it follows the pimple throughout the video. Press this button and it's going to track the pimple throughout your video. Once the tracking is finished, we have all of these keyframes on our mask path. Now what we want to do is to just increase the blurriness underneath Gaussian blur. Make sure that you have repeat edge pixels turned on. Just check it right here. Then go ahead and increase the blurriness amount. Something like this. Then increase your mask feather so that it blends in better with the rest of the skin. Now when I go back, it looks pretty good. This works better with pimples that don't have that much of a height, something like this, or this one. So far we learned how to smooth out the skin and give it a better look. In the next lesson, we're going to see how we can use After Effects and get rid of these bigger areas that you see right here. So we're going to finish off this look in the next lesson using the help of After Effects and some basic color correction. See you guys in the next lesson.